lot of people, well, people who attack Christianity, especially Orthodoxy, like rabbinic Jews and Muslims, they're ignorant of the book of Genesis. So they think everything just starts with the law of Moses, and if you're not doing the exact Sinai covenant, oh, false religion. But Jeremiah 31 says we will have a new covenant. So there has to be some understanding of that and of Genesis. Like they act like the other prophets didn't exist. And I think for Muslims, what makes them think that, other than the fact that maybe a lot of them just don't read the biblical text, is that for them, everything's kind of in stasis in the Quran. All the prophets speak the same way. They have the same kind of message. It's a constant, it's an eternal message. But in the Bible, it's not this constant eternal message. Things do change. The law does develop, and God gives instructions to people in places and times that may be different to the people before them.
Yeah, this is a great point that's overlooked in a lot of the Islamic argumentation and apologetic that we do against them, which is that, in our view, a lot of these things make sense as to why they came to be. The ritual laws, the purity laws, they were symbolic of virtue and vice, good and evil. A lot of the, for example, unclean animals signified the demonic. So there's a significance and a meaning to these rituals, the purification, the baptisms of the book of Leviticus, typifying and presaging Christian baptism, Passover presaging the Eucharist, etc. But in Islam, as we move into that now, a lot of these sort of arbitrary purity laws and dietary laws that carry over, they don't have any significance or purpose. Even the term Messiah in Islam has really no meaning. What does that even mean? And it specifically in the Hebrew context makes sense as the anointed one, the Mashiach, the Messiah who would come to fulfill these prophecies. It doesn't have any significance in Islam because Islam does clearly appear to be a very low-tier copy and paste job of the previous revelations.
Yeah, what's interesting there, definitely, there's been so much Islamic debate over the meaning of the words, like the etymology of Masih in Arabic. What does it mean? They won't say anointed, or if they do, they're just appealing to the biblical text, but their own text doesn't mention it. Now, you'll have vague mentionings in the Quran about the animal sacrifices, but we don't know why they were done. And a lot of Muslims are ignorant of that, and they think it's a pagan thing that was in the Old Testament, but it is mentioned in the Quran in one verse. And there's a lot of interesting parts about their law system that I've pointed out that don't really seem to make sense. So like there's a very famous hadith where it says Isa, their version of Jesus, will come on Judgment Day, and he will destroy all the swine. And there's a big fear of swine in both the Jewish and Islamic worlds, but if you look at the Old Testament, Leviticus actually says shellfish is an abomination, but swine is just unclean. So shellfish is worse, but for some reason the pig is getting all the attention. It's like a cultural thing. It doesn't really continue with what Moses actually taught.
Well, and at the same time, I mean, did Satan create the pigs? I mean, didn't God also create, it's like in the debate that I had with Azrar Rashid, and he was saying that God cannot come through vagina dirty, pee come from vagina. And it's like, okay, so who created the vagina? What I mean?
It's like who made the pig, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting because they basically will admit that like not just the meat of a pig, but like being around a pig is like radiating this unholy.
It's radiating demonic bacon energy. Okay, so let's get to that now. So we're on to Islam. I made the argument that I think one of the key defeaters, kill shot against Islam is that it's not in continuity with what came before in the Torah or even in the Evangel, which is not a book. It's the message of Christ. So let's get into Islam. You had a video a while back that got a lot of views. It was really popular. What are the basic arguments and proof texts that you went to in that video to help us understand what the main problems with Islam are?
Yeah, I've done quite a few videos on Islam. The one that was most popular was a collab between myself and Kyle, and in that one we talked about the similarities between Islam and some strange borrowings from like the Talmud and other spiritualities that really have nothing to do with the continuity of the Bible. And so a lot of Islamic theology seems to think that whatever the Jews are doing, that's just been the Old Testament. So they won't say, yeah, the Talmud is they won't say it's a holy book. But there are influences from it that seem to be as if this book has any continuity with Moses when it doesn't. So you'll see things that are interesting. There's a couple quotes that are found in similarity in Islamic texts and Talmudic texts, such as if you slay one man, it says if you slay the entire world. If you rescue one man, it says if you rescue the entire world. I don't see a citation for that in the Torah or anywhere else in the Old Testament. It actually comes from the Talmud. And there's also some similarities, like we mentioned, about the kind of mode in which God operates. I would argue that the way in which Muhammad speaks to God, which is through the angel, is the way that the rabbinic Jews think you speak to God, but then there's no
That's a great
confirmation.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no confirmation to know, you know, did you really speak to God, or did some being, an entity, appeared and said, "I am here. I'm a messenger from God." Where's the evidence that God can ever give us proper revelation? How do we know we're talking to God if it's just entities and jinns and spirit beings saying, "Oh, I represent God"? Well, where's the proof? Like, we don't
Yeah,
know.
like and like Deuteronomy 13 and Deuteronomy 18 says, in prior given Torah revelation, whatever comes that's new has to be in continuity with what came before. You can't have something that pops up new that's totally out of continuity. And by continuity, I don't mean that there won't be a new covenant or something like that. That's still consistent because the existing revelation says there will be a new covenant. I will raise up a prophet from amongst you. So the existing Torah revelation says the Gentiles will eventually believe in the God of Israel. The Messiah will be a key part of that. There's going to be a new prophet to come, and then we get, text in Deuteronomy saying that here's a key test for a true prophet versus a false prophet. Any new revelations that are claimed have to be consistent with what came before. And at a very fundamental level, if you know the Torah, if you know the Old Testament very well, it's not very hard to see that Islam is not in continuity with it. Makes no sense. They don't, as Gene pointed out, in my experience, like they don't even understand why there was a temple. This is a gigantic portion of the Torah. You got Leviticus, you've got Numbers, you've got all kinds of laws and rules that pertain to the temple, which in Islam basically doesn't make any sense. They don't really know why it was there. It's just sort of a generic thing that's passed over in the Quran where it says something like, and Solomon built many temples. And it's like, yeah, but why? And then yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's compared to kind of how the Kaaba is in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. It's kind of just the house of God, but it's just a generic place where God. Well, they can't really say where God dwells because they don't believe in that. So I guess it's just the house in tribute to God. But we don't know what are you doing with it, where are the sacrifices, and why. Like you said, why are we sacrificing? What's the point of that?
Yeah, the Gabriel Said Reynolds' book is really good for discussing stories in the Quran from the Bible that are all jumbled up. And the stories don't make any sense because you can tell they were like cribbed and maybe heard orally, and then the details got mixed up, and they didn't understand the purpose of the terminology in the Torah and in the Gospels. And so when they heard these things, they would kind of crib, and there would be like, there's a section of the Gospel of John, for example, that's in the Quran that's kind of random. And so it's just kind of cobbled together. Do you have any other examples or thoughts on like inconsistencies with the Quranic narrative and the revelation that came before? And how would you rebut a Muslim that said, well, but the Bible's corrupted? That's why it's like that.
Yeah, well, I would say that the Quran impresses upon the reader, from what I've seen at least, that you do already have some kind of a knowledge, because it doesn't give us Moses' whole life story. It just says, and Moses the prophet did this and that. And if I've never heard of Moses before, it's like, who is this guy? Like, why do I care about Moses? What's his story? Or Jesus, who is that? I have no idea. All I'm seeing are references to people that the Quran at least assumes you already know. You already know Moses, here's his real story. Oh, you heard about the Christian Jesus, here's our version. And so that's what's kind of interesting. There is no chronological storytelling. First of all, the whole Quran is written kind of like we would say like the Psalms, so it's just poetic revelation. And it's told a little bit out of order. So there is no, here's where Jesus comes from and stuff. It's just, oh, and by the way, the Messiah of the Christians, they have it wrong. Here's the correct.
And doesn't it sort of give us the injunction to go and check with prior revelation?
Yeah, it does say to go and check with prior revelation, and that the prophet had been spoken of in previous scriptures, or at least alluded to. So they won't say, yeah, we need to find his full name in Arabic in the Bible, but any kind of semblance of, oh, there's a prophet coming, that would have to be Muhammad then. That's how they're interpreted.
Well, but what I'm saying is, like, when it comes to the message of the Quran overall, it's saying, if this is what I said in the Daniel Hakikachu debate, like if I'm a 7th century Christian or Jew, and I'm hearing this message of the Quran, and it's telling me, hey, go and check the message of the Quran with prior revelation, and you will see that we're in continuity with the prophets. how could I do that when I go and check the revelation? It's not in continuity. And then the response is, oh, well, that's where it's corrupted. So, I mean, this is just a ridiculous circular moving the goalpost argument.
Yeah, I remember that part of that debate. I did a review on it as well, and I pointed out that was a really good point you made, because if we go and check, like you said, it's not the same thing. So the excuse is, oh, it's been corrupted. So if it's been corrupted, how can I check to know that this is the true religion? Well, you need to check the ancient text. But you're saying in the 7th century that this wasn't corrupted, but we know it's the same as in the 7th century. So
And
how are they corrupted?
the texts that are ancient are the Christian and Jewish texts. like, what do you mean?
Right.
Check the ancient text. The ancient what? Muslim text that doesn't exist. So, like,
The,
the only text we could go to are the existing Christian and Jewish manuscripts.
well, that's where the fantasia of al Taurat, al Injil comes from, because it's this idea that, well, if the written one doesn't necessarily add up, there might be some similarities, but if it doesn't add up, there has to have been given to Jesus and Moses literally, like the rabbinics will say that the Torah is, some of the ultra Orthodox Jews will believe that the Torah, like the Quran, is like this uncaused eternal book that fell out of heaven and was given to Moses. So the Muslims won't say that about the Torah, al Taurat, but they'll say that Jesus received a book called the Injil. So it's not like a message he's preaching orally. It's actually a scroll or a book. And so they'll say, where's the Aramaic Bible? Where's the Aramaic gospel? How come you guys have the Greek? Which is extremely shallow arguing, especially because we know that Hebrew is not a dead language. So there's Hebrew and Aramaic mentioned in the New Testament. Paul speaks Hebrew, and when Jesus speaks to Paul, he speaks in Hebrew on the road to Damascus. So it's not like there's no Hebrew. But anyway, that's where this idea that if it doesn't match the actual text we have, maybe there was a eternal or divine book given to Jesus and to Moses, and we don't have access to those. Which again brings us into the circle. How do we check then? How am I supposed to know if this is the true one if I can't access
Yeah,
Moses'
exactly.
Torah?
And for those that are in the audience and are not familiar with this, yes, like it's that bad and silly of an idea. They actually thought that when they heard the gospel of Jesus, they thought that was a book or a scroll. So it's not the message that Jesus preached, as in the gospel, the four gospels. They thought that this is Jesus's scroll that was given to him, just something ridiculous. That's not what the gospel is. It is the message that Christ preached, which is the message of salvation through, what we find in the New Testament: go out, be baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Death, burial, resurrection. That is the gospel. It's not a scroll that floated down from heaven to Jesus. So, any other? I know that was kind of a lengthy video that you did that went really viral. What's some other things that you pointed out in that video? Some other key problems in Islam that you think are essential?
I did mention the Talmud thing, and then kind of this idea of, like you said, the circular reasoning. I would just say that I don't think the Quran has a proper grasp, first of all, on the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. So even if we assume, let's play Shaitan's advocate and say, okay, maybe the Trinity is not the true revelation, can we at least know what it is? But the Quran doesn't point out what it is. It says weird things like Allah is not the third of three, and Jesus and Mary are not gods, which is like the generic. It doesn't say Allah. It says like Ilah, which is kind of the generic version of God. So he's not a divine God, but he's also Allah, meaning the Father or something, is the third of three. It's very vague. Like you would expect if the book was uncaused and it came from heaven, it would pinpoint exactly, oh, Christians, here where you messed up in Constantinople 1 Ecumenical Council. But there's no mention of the Christian doctrines. And the Trinity is a very vague thing, like just don't believe in three. One is better. Occam's razor, man. Why do we need three? I mean, that's kind of the whole argument.
Yeah, I remember, hearing a long time ago that I don't remember exactly. I think I read it in Pelican many years ago that Muhammad had been influenced by Nestorian versions or quote Christianity that's Nestorian. And then when I got the Oxford Handbook of Islam, there was an entire essay on there, both Arian and Nestorian influences on Muhammad. So we have to understand that this helps us figure out why they came up with the confusion that they did in the Quran, which is that they have this weird idea that there is, Jesus has a special role. We don't exactly know what that is. He's called in some sense Word. But his mission, the purpose of virgin birth is not really explained. Why would there need to be a virgin birth? There's no theological redemptive context for why those things are there. They're just said to be there. And that's because the theological influence that Gene was just talking about was clearly Arian and Nestorian, and that makes perfect sense when you read the Quran from that perspective, because that's exactly the type of theology that they have.
Divinity raises the humanity in Christ through theosis, and that's exactly what we experience.